Hi, welcome or welcome back. This is Janie Turk, and we're going to be talking about intimacy. And this is Let's Talk Turkey. So let's start. If you're reading along in the book, you might think that this chapter is a little bit familiar because it is. It covers a lot of things that we've talked about. So for my students, you might not need to write chapter notes this week because you might have already done them. So that's nice. So what are we going to be talking about today? This is definitely not going to be sex ed, not a class I want to teach or I'm qualified to teach. This is talking about sex and intimacy because I think that's an important area of our interpersonal communication skills. And we're not even going to be talking about all of it, just a couple of things that I think it's important to have a conversation about. We are going to talk about consent. We're going to talk about health and safety. We're going to talk about boundaries and things that you like. We're going to talk about the body count question. And we're going to talk about cheating. So let's get started. I encourage you to watch the video called Consent and Tea that I have linked in the PowerPoint, or you can Google it. It's on YouTube. And I've had students tell me rumors over the years that in California, for instance, it's required to have a signed contract. Well, no, it's not. In fact, a signed contract would actually be a bad idea. And you may be wondering why, and the answer is because consent can always be revoked. So I want to talk about the always ask question. And so every time you're going to be intimate with somebody, make it an actual question. Don't make it an assumption. Don't make it a we're in the mood. Make it a are we going to have sex? And if the answer is I don't know, that's a perfectly okay answer. And you can continue with whatever fun activities you're engaged in unless you want more. And if you want more, you can say just that. Say, I was looking for more tonight, and so I think now is a good time to go. And I'm not saying because somebody tells you no that you dump them. I am saying that if that is your expectation, you should probably leave and, as the video would say, go make yourself a cup of tea. Do remember that no is a complete sentence and does not require a justification. Before I talk about rules for first, I want to talk a little bit more about consent. If you make a point to always ask, then there is no question as to whether or not this was forced or consensual. And I know a tragic story of a party where young people were drinking, and one young woman was open about the fact that she was horny and was looking for someone to take care of that problem for her. And several hours and many drinks more, they went into the woods, some guy, and neither one of them really remembered it the next day. So I'm going to guess it wasn't great sex. But what it was tragic because since she couldn't remember, she was convinced that it had not been consensual. And that young man ended up on Megan's list. I'm not going to argue who's right or wrong here. What I am going to argue is that if you are always asking, and it is always a respectful response directly to the answer you get, then there's never going to be any question. And that brings me to our rules for firsts. So while drunken sex can certainly be fun, your first encounter with someone should definitely not be under the influence of anything. No drugs, no alcohol, no lack of sleep. It should be where you are fully capable of giving and receiving consent. And that's going to eliminate a lot of problems. So I strongly encourage you to just make it a habit. Always ask. always, without fail, respect the answer. So let's continue the health and safety talk. So in addition to asking for consent, I want to have a conversation about where you talk about consent, where you talk about anything. And the answer should be with some degree of privacy, but probably not totally in private, especially for the first time. So where are we going to have the conversations about such things as, do you have STDs? Should we use protection? Are you using protection from pregnancy? Do you expect me to do that? How are we going to handle those issues? Have you been tested? All of those things that we want you to have conversations about, you should be having them in a place where you feel comfortable being open and honest, and where your partner feels comfortable being open and honest, but also a place where there's some safety involved. And then the win. So the win is, well, you still have your clothes on. The win is before you get to the point. So if you need to have supplies, you want the opportunity to get them. If you need to go get tested, you want the opportunity to do that. So you don't want to wait until you're hot and heavy in the moment and you're like, whoa, 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 we got to stop for a second and have the conversation. So plan on having it prior to the hot and heavy moment, but after it's already been determined that this is likely where this relationship is going. And then what do you say? And so this is going to be entirely up to you. And I want to say that my generation was not good at these questions and these conversations, and that your generations have shown me much better skills in having these conversations and just making it matter of fact. Like, I don't want to end up with a pregnancy that's unexpected. I don't want to contract an STD or give you one that I might have. So you can say, for instance, yes, I have herpes, or even I have AIDS. There are ways of dealing with those things today, and there weren't when I was young. So I would encourage you to be open and honest about your health status and what your expectations are in terms of safety. Okay, boundaries and wishes. So I've been talking about the stuff that happens before, and this might be something that happens before, and so it might also be aware that happens in that mostly private setting, where you might be talking about, hey, this is something I'd like to try, and this is something I am not open to trying. But again, you do want to practice safety and make sure that you're not entirely isolated. And the win, again, should be in that time and space when you have your clothes on, before you're actually intimate. Although as you develop an intimate relationship, then you can have those conversations in the heat of the moment. We're incredibly vulnerable when we're naked. And so if you're already having a vulnerable conversation, it can feel a little bit more protected and more safe if you have it prior to that moment. And then what do you say? So you can say, this is something I'd like to try. How do you feel about this? Or this is something I've been thinking about. What are your thoughts? Would you be okay with this? You don't want to set it up so the other person feels obligated to give you that automatic yes. You want to make it a conversation where you're doing the perception check, where you're saying, this is the thing I've been thinking about, and I would be okay with this. Or, I want to do some more thinking about that, and let's talk about it. Let's keep talking. Okay. So, the body count question. And here I'm giving you advice as a communication expert, not as a sex therapist, not as a psychiatrist, but this is my information as a communication expert. First off, of course you're curious. Curiosity is natural. And let me be very clear. You are not entitled to know the answer to that question. Do you want to know? Sure. Do I think you should ask? No, I don't think you should ask. And if you are asked, I think that there are only a couple of appropriate answers. So like I said, yes, it's a natural question. Yes, you're curious. What happens if you ask that question and get an answer? There's going to be follow-up questions, and those follow-up questions can actually cause more harm to your relationship than good. So I want to say that it's a natural question. I completely understand it. Don't ask. Just don't. If you get asked, I want you to be aware that the outcomes of giving that honest answer cannot be what you expect. So if I say my number is 3, that number might be higher or lower than yours and might invoke some comparisons. And it might, if your number is substantially higher, then you might be thinking, oh my gosh, you're not going to want to stay with me because you're going to want more experience. If your number is substantially lower than mine, so if your number's 3 and my number's 42, you might be thinking, well, I'm going to have to lie about my answer. So we get in a situation where we have this conversation and we don't know what the other person means by their question, and we might then be motivated to not tell the truth. So that's one of the reasons that I think the outcomes of this conversation can be bad. The other one is that, again, natural question is who? Again, do you want to know? Sure. Does knowing do you any good? That is the ultimate outcome constructive question. Hell no, it does not. It does not do you any good. My husband was married twice before me. I can logically assume that he was intimate with both of those wives. Do I want to make assumptions about other people? Absolutely not. It's not mentally healthy. Those comparisons can be relationship killers. So don't ask. If you get asked, I alluded that there are only 2 appropriate answers. Again, entirely my opinion. But I think that the other things harm your communication. So what are the 2 appropriate answers? You're not my first, or you are my first. So if you are my first, then I think it's a good thing to have that conversation with your partner so they know what to expect. And you can have maybe a more detailed conversation about what you want out of this experience. And if the answer is you're not my first, cool, awesome. That also gives me information, and I am not going to ask a follow-up question. So if you get asked that question, I encourage you to respond with either you are or are not my first. And that's a complete sentence. No further conversation needed, in this communication expert's opinion. So I like to talk about cheating. And I like to talk about cheating because everybody has an opinion on that. But what's super weird to me is that we do not define cheating in the same ways. And the only way you're going to know how your partner defines cheating is if you have this conversation with them. And actually, it starts even before then. So it starts with the, are we in an exclusive relationship conversation? And if we're in an exclusive relationship conversation, is this exclusive relationship somewhat open? And if we think differently about that, we have to have that conversation. And I have heard all kinds of things that one person could label as cheating and another person does not. So do I think that Bill Clinton really doesn't think that oral sex is cheating? I absolutely think that that's what he thinks. Do I agree with him? No. So how do you find that out? You have that conversation. I have students and friends who have thought things like, if you're pleasuring yourself, that's cheating. I would not agree. Doesn't matter what I think. Only matters what you and your partner think. Does watching a porn movie, reading a romance novel, are those things cheating? Is having an intimate conversation over a webcam with a stranger that you're paying them cheating? Doesn't matter what I think. It does matter what you and your partner think. So define those boundaries so you know what the other person thinks. So what do you think is cheating? Is there anything that you think of that your partner might disagree with? Ask them, please, I beg of you, ask them. Because only you and your partner or partners get to decide what is cheating. So it's important to have that conversation. And I want to say, don't cheat. However you define it, whatever that is, don't cheat. However, if you do cheat, don't tell. And I know this is a controversial thing to say, and let me explain to you why. If you cheat, what I think you should do is make a decision. This thing has happened, and I'm either going to end the relationship and not tell my partner I cheated on them, or, because I'll get to that in a minute, or I'm going to recommit to this relationship and really earn my way back into my partner's trust. Because here's the deal. Unless you're a sociopath, your partner knows if you've cheated. And I'm not talking about some weird psychic, oh my God, this other person just cheated on me. I'm talking about the fact that unless you're a sociopath, it has changed your behavior. And on some level, your partner knows. So if you tell them, what you're doing is you are rubbing their nose in it, and you're transferring your sense of guilt to the innocent party. And that's not fair. If you've cheated, you deserve to feel guilty. You do not deserve to transfer it onto them. And if you've cheated and decided to end the relationship, telling them that you cheated just makes it uglier and more hurtful and more damaging to their self-esteem. And again, that's not fair. Don't do that. If you cheat, and don't cheat, please don't cheat. But if you cheat, don't tell. Unless there's hardcore proof and it's going to come out. Unless, for instance, as a result of cheating, you created a child or you contracted an STD. In those cases, do confess. Do be honest about it. But don't do it to relieve your guilt, because that's just cruel. It's not honesty, it's cruelty. So don't do that. So I want to get back to the idea of what we should be talking about in relationships. And so whatever status you have right now, so if you're not in a relationship, imagine this is a first date. If you are in a relationship, whatever stage that relationship is in, you've been dating for a long time, you're newly engaged, you've been married for a while, whatever you are, imagine that you're right there. And your partner, whether it's a first date or a long-time married partner, says, for instance, doesn't just say, you come home and they are fully dressed head to toe in a furry costume. And then they say, I've been wanting to talk to you about this. This is something I'd like to try. How are you going to respond? And I use this particular example. Furries have risen to popularity in popular culture. So it may be something that you might encounter, but I also think of the things that people could talk about, it's probably relatively harmless. So, what do you say? How open you are to saying that? And over and over and over again in this video, I've used the word say, because I want to reemphasize that nonverbal communication does not cut it. Don't rely on your facial expression, because I come home in a furry costume and my husband blushes. Does that mean that he's excited or embarrassed? I don't know. So what you do want to use, just like you were told when you were a little kid, is your words. Because that squeak in bed could be, ouch, your elbow's on my hair and it hurts, or it could be, ooh, this is really fun. Use your words. So I want you to imagine this situation. What would you say? That's all. And then for our discussion board post, oh, for the love of God, no details, please. This is going to be one that is super brief. I just want you to say, in response to our question, our imagination, that yeah, I have a pretty good idea of what I would say and how well I think my partner would receive it. That's all you're going to write. Yes, I have a good idea, or no, I cannot even imagine how I would say that, and so I don't know how it would work. And by Sunday, read your classmates' post. You can even give a couple of them thumbs up. No details. This one's going to be super vague. An outsider reading our discussion board would have no idea what we were talking about, and that's the way I want it. In your real life, I want you to be specific. On the discussion board, I do not want a single detail this week. And no sim journal this week. Easy peasy, huh? Maybe no reading. Discussion board, super easy. No sim journal, light week. In case no one said it today. I love you. This has been Let's Talk Turkey with Janie Turk. And if this is content you appreciate, please like, follow, and share. Have a great week.